Hello, I'm Finola from RaaS Research Group, and today our focus is on specialty alloy additive manufacturing powder manufacturer, Amaero International, ASX ticker 3DA. And joining me to discuss progress on its flagship Tennessee operation is Chairman and CEO, Hank Holland. Welcome back, Hank. It's great to have you back on the interviews.
Hello, Finola. Thanks again for your continued interest.
So, Hank, you've entered into a binding offtake agreement for the supply of C103 additive manufacturing powder with a leading additive manufacturing manufacturer of C103 and refractory alloys in the US, and they are focused on the defence and space industries. Can you walk us through the steps to production from here and the risks you may encounter along the way?
Absolutely. And I would step back for a moment, and I've alluded to this in prior investor briefings and communications, but we, 7 weeks ago, when we had an investor briefing relating to the Fairmont study, I made a comment then that we were making good progress and that we're advancing a commercial offtake agreement. And I suggested to investors, when we do eventually announce it, pay particular attention to the counterparty. And albeit we have not announced the counterparty by name for reasons that I described yesterday, notably that we want to wait until we have final qualification to do so, we have described them fairly robustly. And, I think it is, one could easily conclude from the description that we've given that this is a very significant and well-respected leading manufacturer when it comes to additive manufacturing of C103 and refractory alloys for defense and space. And so the offtake agreement, I don't think of as simply a purchase order. I think of it as a strategic collaboration. And part of that strategic collaboration, in addition to the demand on the offtake, is a collaborative qualification. And with that collaborative qualification, what this will enable us to do is not only expedite what we expect to be the qualification process, but upon completing that qualification process, we will essentially have the gold standard. We will have qualified with the most significant, most important manufacturer in the space. And so for that reason, I think it is a very, very big deal. On the process in your question, what do I mean by collaborative qualification? Look, at the end of the day, as any third party would, they want to assure the integrity of the process, and there's nothing I'm suggesting that will shortcut that in any manner. Absolutely not. What I am suggesting, though, is that the time period of which we could accomplish this will be truncated. And so we've developed a flow chart, if you will, a process flow. We will essentially overnight them powder. They will run their test. They will provide a feedback loop of that data. If necessary, we will re-optimize our parameter set. We'll print powder, we'll overnight powder, they'll rerun that data. And so there will be this real-time feedback loop that will allow us to iterate our parameter optimization in a much more truncated and expedited manner. The matter of qualifying is not a binary matter of do we qualify or will we not qualify. We are highly, highly, highly confident that we will qualify. It's a matter of timing. So first, why am I so confident we will qualify? The technology that we're using, the IGA, is the same technology that is used by ATI, the largest producer in the US, albeit they have the original generation of the IGA technology, and we have the more advanced or next generation of the IGA technology. So this exact same technology has qualified C103 in the past. It's capable of operating in a high temperature environment, which most of the other technologies are not. On top of that, and I can't mention the agency, but one of the US federally funded agency ran tungsten and moly, that is refractory alloys, through our very IGA while installed in Germany about a year ago, and they had their own trial results from that. They actually concluded, this agency did, that IGA was the only technology capable of qualifying refractory alloys. So we're highly confident we'll qualify. The question is, how long will it take us? We think with this collaborative relationship we have with this offtake partner that we can truncate that. What I advised on the investor briefing yesterday that I gave was we expect in the first quarter of the fiscal year, so the July, August, September quarter, that we will deliver powder to this counterparty for testing purposes. And I announced yesterday that we expect in the second quarter of the fiscal year, or October, November, December quarter, that we would achieve qualification. I also reminded investors that have followed this company, we have a pretty good track record of providing conservative guidance that we're confident we can outperform, under promise, over deliver. And I expect that will be the case with this guidance as well.
And Hank, once you secure qualification, you have a guaranteed buyer of 2.25 tonnes of C103 at a fixed price. While there's no commitment to buy beyond that, how should we think about future contracted production? And do you see an opportunity to sell specialty alloys to this customer as well?
Yeah, so what we've announced on the offtake agreement is, as you suggested, the party is contracted for 2.5 tons. 1/2 ton is essentially for testing purposes. That's what's been set aside for qualification purposes. And then commercial sales of 2 tons beginning the first quarter of next year, and we would expect they would take delivery over 4 quarters next year. Okay, that is the only contractual element of offtake that we have announced. What I've also announced is once we qualify, this becomes a 5-year supply agreement. And once we qualify, we would expect to disclose the name of the counterparty as well as other terms of that supply agreement. So we're not at liberty at this point to disclose that, but we would expect that it would mature and turn into a long-term supply agreement.
Great. And you've also raised $20 million from investors in Australia to deliver working capital and for CapEx commitments. You've indicated that future equity raises would come from strategic US investors. Do you have a sense of timing for future capital requirements, Hank?
Yeah, again, great question. And here too, we've tried to be very transparent and quite granular with investors about the capital that we expect to need to have a fully funded capability. And we announced, again, 7 weeks ago in the Fairmont presentation that our total CapEx, and I'm going by memory, but I'm pretty sure this is right. You can correct me, you'll probably remember. I believe it was $76 million, but that was through the end of fiscal year 28. Okay. We've also announced that calendar year 25, we expect to be EBITDA positive. And we announced that calendar year 26, we expect to be free cash flow positive. And thus from operations, we can fund all of our CapEx. That being said, we do not expect that we will need to raise $76 million of capital. It will be something less than that. Really, what we need to raise capital for is the balance of calendar year 24, call that 9 months, all of calendar year 25, 12 months, so a little bit less than 2 years of capital. The recent institutional capital raise that we just closed that you mentioned is a very big deal for a couple of reasons. It is the first institutional capital raise that we've had. $17.5 million of that $20 million was spoken for by 3 cornerstone investors. I'm not at liberty to disclose those investors. We have provided descriptions, again, that I think many investors can probably conclude who they are. But these are, by any measure, world-class institutional investors. And so from my standpoint, this is a really, really big deal. Right? It's affirmation, if you will, of our strategy, of our strategic positioning and the execution to date. And I'm enormously grateful of the trust and the confidence these institutional investors have showed in us. On a going forward basis, what we would expect and what we've announced is we will not anticipate having another capital raise in Australia. As we've disclosed, we've retained Guggenheim, a preeminent M&A advisory firm in the US. This was largely prompted by unsolicited inbound interest. And I wanted first to conclude the offtake agreement, conclude an institutional raise in Australia. I will now turn my attention to those discussions. There is your question about timing. There's no timing set in stone. We don't need to raise that capital until much later this year. We'll raise the capital as soon as we have a counterparty in terms which we deem to be attractive, right? So we have time. We've got the luxury of time given this close. At the very same time, I want this business continue to be very, very well funded. But just as the offtake agreement was particularly strategic, and just as these institutional investors were particularly strategic, a big part of that decision of when will be who are those partners, the strategic natures of those partners. And I think that will drive the process as much as anything.
Hank, you mentioned Guggenheim. And obviously, they're looking at both strategic debt and equity capital for for Amaero. Are you in a position to provide an update on how discussions are progressing there?
I would only say that the reception, and Guggenheim is now reaching out to really two sets of parties, what I would call strategic investors. Think of these as investors from industry. So whether it's a prime defense contractor or prime space contractor, or whether it's a first-tier supplier / manufacturer, whether it's a material company, okay, that ecosystem that is central to the industry of which we participate, and financial sponsors. As you know, in the US, we've got a very robust private equity set of investors, and they have initiated conversation across those subset of investors. I will tell you that the receptivity has been very well received, very strong. One of the more important decisions that we made over the last 9 months was to focus exclusively on high value specialty alloys, be it C103, be it specialty alloys, be it titanium 6-4. If we are going to market right now, candidly, and we were a stainless steel powder producer or a nickel powder producer, I think it would be a bit of a yawn. I don't think it would be all that strategically interesting. But because we're at the nexus of this critical reshoring effort in the US, and at the nexus of the most critical part of the supply chain, right, i.e. these high value specialty alloy powders, and because it's a predicate condition that we stand up an alternative US domestic supplier to satisfy manufacturing readiness, we're getting a lot of interest, and I would expect that will continue. I think we'll have some very good choices to select from as we proceed down this road with Guggenheim.
And Hank, can you remind us what milestones we can expect the company to tick off over the next 6 months?
Yeah, in many ways, I think this is maybe the most important question for investors. So what we've communicated over the last several months is that we expect to commission the first atomizer by 30 of June. So by the end of the fiscal year. And we've reiterated that I think we are confident we are on or ahead of schedule. By the way, when we commission that first atomizer, mind you, when we ordered this atomizer 2 odd years ago, the plan was to make Ti 6-4. So we will, the test that we will run for acceptance and commissioning, we bought 2 tons of bar of Ti 6-4. So we will run significant powder of Ti 6-4. We'll have inventory for qualification purposes and everything else. And that will be done in conjunction with accepting and commissioning the atomizer. We will then immediately turn to setting parameter optimization for the production of C103 powder. I announced in the call again yesterday, we would expect to commence production of C103 powder and provide test material in that first quarter of the fiscal year, right? The July, August, September. And then the next very, very important milestone will be achieving final qualification for C103. We've said that would be in the second quarter of the fiscal year. We'll report back, but those will be very, very important milestones. Along the way, one should expect other offtake agreements, other commercial agreements. I've suggested that we have advanced discussions with a Department of Defense funded laboratory that is at the center, if you will, of the efforts, particularly related to hypersonics and strategic missiles. I would expect to see that advanced and announced at some point. And there are not a large number, but there are other manufacturers in the sector that are particularly strategic. And so that would really, as I look between now and the end of the year, those will be the high value, significant milestones that investors should expect.
Well, thank you, Hank, for joining me today. I'm looking forward to catching up with you over the course of the next 12 months to check on Amaero's progress.
Thank you, Finola.